The auctioneer had introduced her 4 times before. He did not say this plainly. He said it the way men say things they know will lower the price, quickly, folded between 2 louder things, with a small wave of the hand, as if it were a minor point. Returned, he said. 4 times. Buyers of good standing, all of them. No fault in the papers. The market square was not large. A ring of rails and posts ran around it. It smelled of sawdust and pen animals, and the particular kind of cold that settles into a place where people stand and wait. 24 men, maybe more, held their ground in the open with their collars turned up against the wind. A few had dogs that sat in the mud and watched the block. Most of the men were not looking at it directly. The way they were not looking told him everything about how much they were watching. She stood on the block with her hands at her sides. She was tall. Not the kind of tall that draws comment, the kind that simply is, the way a fence post or a stone wall is, without apology or announcement. Her hair was black and pulled back tight from her face. Her face was still, not calm, not patient. Still, the way something is still when it has decided not to move and means to hold that. The auctioneer waited. No one spoke. He raised his hand from the back of the square. 1 finger. There was a pause, the kind that comes before a thing becomes real, where the auctioneer looked at him and then swept his gaze out across the crowd to see if anyone else would come in. No one did. Going once, the auctioneer said. Going twice. He paid what was asked. He did not offer less. He did not deliberate. The auctioneer took the money with the expression of a man who had expected an argument and did not quite know what to do without one. The paperwork took longer than the purchase. A market agent entered 4 return columns in neat lines in his ledger and slid the document across. The man read it all the way through before he signed. The agent waited with the patience of someone who had his explanations ready and was beginning to suspect they would go unused. The man signed where indicated. He folded his copy twice, put it in his shirt pocket, and picked up his hat from the fence post where he had set it. 4 returns, the agent said. Not a warning exactly. The word for it was something he did not quite have. I read it, the man said. He did not ask what was wrong with her. He did not ask why the others had sent her back. He walked across the yard to where she stood beside his cart. She was not leaning against it. She was standing beside the wheel with her hands at her sides again, the same as on the block. She watched him come across the yard. Her eyes were dark and level and gave him nothing, which he understood. He had spent enough time with animals that did not know yet whether he meant harm to recognize that kind of stillness. He climbed up to the board seat and took the reins. He did not tell her to get in. She stood another moment. Then she climbed into the back of the cart. He had not brought chains. There were none to bring. The cart moved out through the gate and onto the road north. The sky ahead was the color of old iron. The wind came flat and steady across the open ground. Neither of them said a word for a long time. Something in the quality of his silence was different from the 4 men before him. That night would tell her why. The road north took most of the day. The land flattened as they went, the hills behind them going small and then disappearing into the grey. There were no other carts on the road and no towns to pass through, just a feed store at a crossroads with its sign hanging sideways, and then open fields, and then the fields thinning out into dry scrub and fence line, and then nothing but the road itself, and the sound of the wheels on the hard ground. He did not speak during the ride. She did not either. He heard her shift once in the back of the cart, maybe 2 hours in, and then nothing after that. He did not look back to check on her. He drove. The farm came into view from the top of a low rise. He did not slow down to let her look at it. She looked anyway. The fences needed work. 3 sections of rail were down on the east side, and the posts along the south run had heeled over in the wet ground and not been straightened. The main outbuilding leaned slightly to the west. The fields were in partial use, the near half turned and planted, the far half grown out in dry thistle and scrub grass. It was not abandoned. It was the kind of place a man keeps up when he is doing the work of 2, doing what he can, and leaving the rest for next season, and then the season after that. He pulled the cart around to the yard and stopped. The house was not large. A covered porch ran along the front of it, and on the porch wall there were tools hung in a row, a hoe and a long-handled rake, and a small bladed trowel, each on its own peg, hung with care. The kind of care a person takes with things that belong to someone else. He did not look at them as he walked past. He had stopped looking at them some time ago, which was a different thing from not seeing them. To the left of the house, a garden plot ran along the south wall. It had been left to go half wild. The beds were still edged, and the canes tied, but the growth had come in heavy and untended, and something that was not the original planting had spread into the near corner. He did not look at that either, nor at the pair of work gloves on the windowsill inside, small ones, not his size, still folded together the way a person folds them at the end of a day they expect to come back from. He went inside and came back out with a lamp and a folded blanket. He crossed the yard to the outbuilding and pushed the door open and stood aside. It was dry, clean enough, a cot against the far wall, a shelf above it, a small iron hook near the door. He stepped in and set the lamp on the shelf. He laid the blanket at the foot of the cot. He pointed at the cot, then at the hook, without looking at her. Then he walked back out. She stood in the doorway and looked at the room for a long time. He did not wait. He walked back to the house. He put together a plate of cold things and left it on the porch step. Then he went inside and ate his own meal at the table by the window and did not look out. After a while he heard the plate shift on the step outside. He did not go and check. He went to bed. The lamp in the outbuilding burned for a while, visible as a thin pale line under his door. Then it went out. He woke somewhere past midnight to a sound he could not name right away. It was not a cry, not a voice. It was the sound of something being controlled, which is its own kind of sound, a held-back thing that takes shape in the space where noise was not permitted to go. He lay still and listened. It came again, low, from the outbuilding. He got up without lighting the lamp inside. He pulled on his boots and his coat and took the lamp from the shelf by the door and lit it in the cold air of the porch. The yard was dark. No moon. The outbuilding door was closed, which was how he had left it. He crossed the yard and knocked once, and waited, and then pushed the door open. She was sitting against the far wall with her back against it, and her legs drawn up. She had not been sleeping. She was not asleep now. Her face was turned toward the door and her eyes were open, and for a moment neither of them moved. He looked at her. Then he looked at her hands, pressed flat against her side below the ribs. He had learned some things about animals that held still when they were hurt. The stillness was the same. He set the lamp on the floor inside the door. He did not say anything. He went back to the house. He came back with what he kept for cuts and tears, a clean rag, a small tin of the salve he used on the animals, a strip of linen he had not needed yet that winter. He set them on the floor beside the lamp and crouched down. He looked at her hands, still pressed to her side. He did not ask. He made a gesture, small, toward her side. Then he waited. She looked at him for a long time. Then she moved her hands away. It was bad. Not the worst he had seen, but bad enough. a tear in the skin, deep, and around it the kind of dark that meant it had been going some time without air or care. She had been managing it since before the market, maybe before that. He did not let his face show anything about that. He worked slowly and did not make sudden movements. He cleaned it. He applied the salve. He wrapped the linen around and tied it without pulling it tight enough to hurt. She did not make a sound through any of it. She watched his hands, not his face. His hands. When he was done, he sat back on his heels and looked at what he had done and decided it would hold. He picked up the lamp and set it on the floor between them instead of taking it with him. Then he sat down with his back against the wall on his side of it. Not near her, just in the room. She watched him. He did not explain himself. He did not have an explanation that would have fit into words anyway. After a while, the cold came in through the boards, and he got up and went back to the house. He lay down and did not sleep right away. He had seen people hold pain like that, the kind that was kept quiet not because they couldn't make noise, but because they had decided it was nobody's business. He understood the decision. He had made it himself. More than once. There was a particular thing in it that was not quite pride, and not quite stubbornness. Something harder to name than either of those. What he had not done in a long time was sit in the same room as someone else who knew what that cost. In the outbuilding, she lay down. She did not sleep right away either. The lamp burned between where they had been sitting. After a while, it went out on its own. He was up before it was properly light. He put together a plate of bread and a piece of salt meat from the smokehouse and a cup of water from the pump, and carried it across the yard. He set it on the step outside the outbuilding door without knocking and without calling out. Then he walked to the south fence and started on the section that had been down the longest. The morning was cold and clear. His breath came out in the still air in small white puffs. He pulled the first post and dug out the rotted base and squared the hole and set a new post in and tamped it down with the heel of his boot. And when he straightened up and looked, the outbuilding door was open and the plate was gone. She was in the doorway, watching him. He turned back to the fence. A while later, he heard footsteps in the yard, not coming toward him, moving somewhere else. He did not look up. He kept working. The posts needed to be set before the ground softened any more, and he had 3 sections to go before the south fence would hold again. He had been meaning to get to it since early fall. When he went to pull a second post from the stack, he stopped. She was standing at the near end of the fence line, a few yards back, watching him work. Her arms were at her sides, not offering, not asking, just there in the morning light. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said what needed saying. Work if she wanted. Eat regardless, either way, it did not matter to him. No chains, and he would not put any. He would not touch her again without a reason she could see ahead of time. She said nothing. He was not sure how much of it she had understood. Her face gave him nothing to read. He picked up the post and went back to the hole. He had finished setting it and was moving to the next when she spoke. Reason. 1 word. He stopped. It was not a question exactly, and it was not a refusal. It was the word of someone checking the terms of a thing before they agreed to it, which was reasonable enough. He thought about it. Like last night, he said. She was quiet. He picked up the post driver and lined up the next stake. You were hurt, he said. I did something about it. That's what I meant. She looked at him. He did not elaborate. He drove the stake. After a moment, she turned and walked back towards the outbuilding. He watched her go, then looked at the fence line and considered what still needed doing before dark. By midday, she had not come back out. He ate his meal on the porch step and left another plate on her step and returned to work. He did not check to see if she ate it. He worked until the light went flat and his hands told him to stop. When he came in to wash up, he could see through the kitchen window that the plate on her step was empty. He did not go out to retrieve it. He went to bed with the window cracked the way he usually did, to hear if anything went wrong in the night. He lay still in the dark for a while and listened to the yard. The outbuilding was quiet. Nothing went wrong. On the third day, she was at the fence line when he came out of the house. She was not working. She was standing a few yards back from where he had left off, looking at the posts he had already set. She had her arms crossed over her chest against the cold. He came across the yard with his tools, and she stepped back to give him room, and that was all. He did not greet her. He picked up where he had stopped. He worked the next post out of the stack and set it in the hole and picked up the tamper. Then he set the tamper down, picked up the post driver from the ground, and held it out toward her without turning around. He kept his eyes on the post. He waited. She took it. He moved to the next hole. She drove the stake he had just set. She did not do it the way he did, with a short punching motion, 3 or 4 strikes and check. She did it with one long, controlled stroke, and the stake went in straight and deep and didn't shift when she pressed her shoulder to it to test the set. He glanced once and went back to digging. They worked through the morning without speaking. He dug and set. She drove. He moved down the line. She followed when she was done with the previous stake and not before. They did not discuss it or arrange it. It worked out that way on its own. At midday, he stopped and went up to the house to eat. She went back to the outbuilding. He ate at the porch step and looked at the fence line. 14 posts set in the morning. The section was the straightest he had gotten it in 2 years. He did not think much about why that was. He finished his meal and went back down to where he had stopped. He worked the near section through the afternoon, setting 3 more posts and running 2 more rails before the cold started working into his hands. The far end of the run, past the property marker, he left for another day. When the light began to go, he gathered his tools and turned to head back to the house. He stopped. The far section was done. Not just the stakes, which he had set 2 days ago and not gotten to, but the full section, rails and all, hung level and solid. He walked down to look at it. The posts were set deeper than his own by a good margin, and straighter, and the rails sat flush in their notches without any gap. Someone had taken time with it. He stood there for a while in the last of the light and looked at the work. Then he walked back to the house without saying anything, because there was no one to say it to. He washed up and put a fire on, and made his meal and ate it. When he came out to the porch afterward, the outbuilding door was open, which was different from how it usually was at that hour. She was sitting on the step in the open doorway. Not leaning, not watching the road, just sitting with her hands flat on her knees in the early dark, the way a person sits when they are in no particular hurry to be anywhere else, and the dark does not especially trouble them. He went inside and left the porch lamp burning so the yard had some light. On the 5th day, the draft horse spooked at something in the near field and got its lead line wrapped around a post. He heard it from the barn, a sharp sound, and then the sustained noise of a large animal in trouble. He got there fast, and the situation was already going bad. The horse had twisted twice and pulled the post half out of the ground and was hauling against the line with its full weight, which was going to break something, and he could not get close enough to help it. Every time he reached for the line, the horse laid its ears flat and shifted, and he had to step back. He tried twice more and got the same result. She came around the side of the barn. He did not say anything. There was no time, and he did not know what she intended to do. She slowed as she got close. She did not reach for the line. She stopped about 6 feet back from the horse and made a sound low in her throat. Not a word, not any kind of hum he recognized, something that did not fit any category he had for sounds. The horse flicked its ears back toward her. She made the sound again, changed slightly. The horse's ears came forward. It stopped pulling against the line. She took 3 steps closer, very slowly, still making the sound. She put one hand up near the horse's jaw, palm open, and waited until it brought its nose to her. Then, with her other hand, she worked the lead line loose from the post without looking at it, her eyes on the horse the whole time. The horse did not move. She walked the horse clear of the post and handed the lead to him and stepped back. He stood there with the lead in his hand. The horse was still and breathing quietly. He had kept that horse for 6 years, and it had never come down from a bad spook that fast. Not for him. He led it back to the barn without speaking. He checked it over and got it settled, and went back out to reset the post, which took nearly an hour, because the hole had to be dug out and reseated properly. She had gone back to whatever she had been doing before. He did not call out to her. He finished the post and did not say anything about what had happened, because there was not anything to say that the event had not already said on its own. That evening he went inside and stood in the kitchen for a while. On the shelf above the wash basin, there was a small glass jar with seeds in it from the summer garden. He had not done anything with them. He had not been able to get to the point of doing anything with them. He took the jar down and carried it across the yard and set it on the step of the outbuilding without knocking. Then he walked back to the house. He did not explain it. There was not an explanation that would have improved anything. He watched from the dark of the kitchen window. After a while she came to the doorway and picked up the jar and turned it over in her hands and looked at it for a long time. Then she stepped back inside and set it just inside the door in the strip of fading light. He went to bed. The fire was his habit. He built it in the yard most evenings when the weather allowed, after supper, and sat with it for an hour or so before going in. He did not know when she had started coming out too. He had not noticed the first evening it happened, or the second. By the third time, it was just the way the evenings went. They sat on opposite sides of the fire, not by any arrangement, just the way it had worked out. Not facing each other. Both facing it. The night was clear and cold, and the nearest neighbor was too far away to see the light. He spoke first. He told her his wife had been dead for 3 years. Not quite 3. He told her the farm had been the 2 of them from the beginning, that they had broken the ground together and built most of it with their own hands, that she had known more about growing things than he had ever gotten around to learning. She had made the garden and kept it and knew when to plant and when to leave things alone. He told her he had stayed on after because he did not know what else to do with himself, and because leaving would have felt like giving the land the last word, and he was not willing to do that. He stopped talking. The fire did what it did between them. After a long time she spoke. The first man, she said, had wanted her to kneel when he brought guests into the house. That was the custom of his household. She had not done it. She had stood in the doorway and watched the guests come in and stayed where she was, with her hands at her sides. He returned her the following day. He said nothing. She kept going. The second man had a rule about the order of meals in his household. She had eaten before his other servants. He returned her. The third man gave a wrong instruction about his livestock once, in front of her and in front of his sons. She corrected him. He returned her 3 days later. The fourth man had hit her. She did not say what for. She had not gone down. She had looked at him from where she stood. He returned her the next morning, before the rest of the house was awake. She said all of this the way a person reads through a list they have been through before, without rushing and without looking for anything in his face. When she finished, she looked at the fire again and did not add anything to it. He sat with it for a long time. He had known men like that. Not all of them were cruel in the way the word usually means. Some of them just could not bear to be in the same room as something that would not diminish itself for them, and when that thing was a person, it made them feel a kind of threat that had nothing to do with anything that could actually harm them. He had never had much use for those men. He had spent most of his life not needing to think much about what happened at places like that market square. He had not had occasion to. That was different now. He looked at the fire. "He was afraid of you," he said. He meant the fourth one, but it fit all of them, and she probably knew that. She looked at the fire for a moment. "Yes," she said. He nodded once. He did not say anything else. The thing had been said, and there was not anything to add to it that would not have made it smaller. The fire burned down. After a while, she got up and went back to the outbuilding without a word. He sat with the coals for a time, watching them go grey at the edges and then dark, and after a while longer, he went inside and did not light another lamp. 3 weeks passed, and the farm looked different. The south fence held. The east section was repaired, and the posts were at the right depth and would not heel over again. The animals were calmer than they had been in a long time and easier to work with in the mornings. The barn door, which had been hanging wrong for most of the year and latching badly in wet weather, had been rehung and now sat square. The far field, the half he had been leaving for next season, and then the season after that, had been turned and planted, the rows even, and the soil worked down properly, which was not something he had managed on his own. They had fallen into a way of working that neither of them had decided on. He did what he could do, and she did what she could do, and sometimes those things overlapped, and sometimes they did not. Sometimes she started something before he got to it, and he came in to what she had already set up. He had stopped explaining himself, and she had stopped waiting to be told. On a morning in the 3rd week, he made food and brought it outside to the table in the yard, because the light was better there. He set down 2 plates without thinking about it. She came from the outbuilding and sat down across from him, and they ate without talking. The sun was at a good angle, and there was no wind, and neither of them was in any hurry to go back to work. He did not think about it until after, when the plates were cleared and he was back at his tools. Then he thought. That was the first time. The jar was gone from the step of the outbuilding. He had noticed that a few days back and not said anything about it. The wife's garden plot along the south wall of the house had a new section turned and planted along the near edge. The soil worked in the same careful way the field rows had been. He did not know what she had put in. He had not asked, and she had not said. The seeds in the jar had been from the summer before last. He did not know how well they would take. That was her decision, not his. He did not go over to look at the plot up close. He noted it from where he was and went back to what he was doing. That afternoon, while she was working the east side of the yard, a rider came along the road. He saw it first, a man on a brown horse, moving at a walk, slower than the road called for. He came from the south along the fence line and did not stop and did not call out. He looked at the farm as he passed. He looked at the outbuilding. He looked at her, standing at the fence with tools in her hands, and his gaze stayed on her a moment longer than a man looks at something that is none of his concern. Then he kept on and went around the bend and was gone. She had seen him. She had not moved or changed what she was doing. She turned back to her work before the sound of the horse faded out. He watched the bend in the road for a while. It stayed empty. He picked up his tools and went back to what he had left off. He did not say anything about the rider that evening. He did not know yet what there was to say. The official came on a Tuesday, 3 days after the rider on the road. He was a compact man in a grey coat with a document case tied to his saddlebag. His coat was buttoned to the throat, and his boots were clean for a road call. He came up the track to the yard at a steady walk, and dismounted without being invited, and tied his horse to the porch rail. He had the practiced ease of a man who did this kind of work often enough that he no longer thought much about it. He introduced himself as a market compliance officer for the district. He did not offer his name, only his function and his district. He said he was conducting routine checks on transactions with flagged return histories. The man said nothing. He waited. The official asked to see the bill of sale. The man went inside and came back out with it. He had been keeping it in the table drawer since the day he came home from the market. He unfolded it and handed it across. The official looked it over. He examined the 4 return columns, and the dates, and the names and the date of the current purchase. He looked at the man's signature. He looked at the market agent's seal. He turned the document over, looked at the blank back, and turned it front again. He read through the return entries a second time. The document was complete, and the dates were in sequence, and the seal was properly affixed. "Satisfactory purchase record," the official said. He meant the paperwork was in order. He looked up and across the yard. She was at the east fence with a post driver in her hands, working, not looking in their direction. The official watched her for a moment. Then he looked back at the man. "Is the property performing satisfactorily?" the official said. It was not quite a question. "She works," the man said. The official took a small notebook from his coat pocket and wrote something in it. He did not say what. He put the notebook away and handed back the bill of sale. "Accounts with repeat return histories are under monitoring," the official said. "Performance issues are to be reported through the proper market channel. That is the required process." "I know the process," the man said. "Good." The official looked across the yard again. She had moved to the next post and was working it. "We are not looking for trouble," he said. "The records need to be accurate." "I'll report if there's something to report," the man said. The official nodded. He closed his notebook. He untied his horse from the porch rail and mounted and rode back down the track the way he had come. He did not look back. He watched the road for a minute. The official did not slow at the end of the track or turn. He kept on at the same pace and went out of sight around the bend to the south. Then the road was just the road again. The man folded the bill of sale and put it in his shirt pocket this time. She came across the yard when the official was well gone from sight. She stopped a few yards off and looked at him. He looked at the fence line. "He checked the papers," he said. "Papers are fine." She said nothing. He said nothing else. After a moment, she turned and walked back to the east fence and picked up the post driver and went back to work. He went to get his tools from the barn and did not look at the road again. They came in the morning, 3 of them on horses. He was at the gate end of the south fence when he heard them on the road. He looked up. 3 riders coming up the track from the south, not at a walk. He set his tools down and stood at the gate and did not move from it. The man in front was broad through the chest and sat his horse like a man who expected people to step aside for him. He was the 4th return entry in the document. He recognized the date, and he knew the look. The man stopped his horse at the gate. His 2 men pulled up behind him. He looked at the farm. He looked at the man at the gate. Then he stated his business. He was the previous buyer of record on the property in question. The market's processing of his return had taken longer than the permitted window, and the subsequent sale had gone through before his return was formally closed, which made the current purchase premature in the legal sense. He had documentation to that effect. He wanted the property returned to him, or compensation in lieu, settled at market rate. He said all of this like a man who had been through it before and expected it to work. The man at the gate listened. He did not respond. He heard her footsteps behind him. He did not look around. She had been working the garden along the south wall, and she would have seen the horses from there. The footsteps stopped. Then they started again, slower and more deliberate. She came to stand beside him at the gate on his left. She said nothing. He did not look at her. He could feel the shift in the space beside him, the way a room changes when something large and settled walks into it. The man on the horse looked at her. Something crossed his face. He looked back at the man at the gate and said again that this was a legal matter, and that he had standing, and that he wanted resolution before the end of the week. The man at the gate reached into his shirt pocket and took out the bill of sale and held it up. He did not say anything. He held it there in the morning light and waited. The man on the horse looked at the document. He looked at the date of sale. He looked at the market seal. He looked at the man holding it, who had not moved and was not going to. He looked at her beside him, her hands at her sides, her spine straight. He looked at the farm behind them, the south fence running straight and solid, the gate square on its posts, the garden plot along the south wall turned and planted and showing green at the near edge. He looked at the tools against the fence. He looked at the horse in the yard, standing calm. He counted something. He looked at the 2 of them again. Not one of the 3 horses moved. Not one of the 2 men behind him said a word. The man on the horse sat there for a long time. The wind came across the yard and settled. Something moved across his face. Not fear exactly, but the look of a man working out a sum and not liking what it comes to. The kind of calculation a man makes when the ground he picked out is not what he thought it was. He looked at her one more time. She looked back at him. She did not move, and she did not speak, and she did not look away. He pulled his reins. "This isn't finished," he said. He turned his horse. His 2 men turned with him. They rode back down the track and did not look back and went out of sight around the south bend. He stood at the gate until they were gone, and for a while after. She stayed beside him a moment longer. Then she turned and walked back to the garden without a word. He folded the bill of sale and put it back in his shirt pocket. The dust from the horses settled on the track, and then the track was quiet. They stood at the gate a moment longer. He had the bill of sale still folded in his hand. He folded it once more and put it in his shirt pocket. She did not say anything. He did not say anything. After a while, she turned and walked back to the garden. He went to look at the gate properly. One of the horses had caught the corner rail when they turned to leave, coming through at a bad angle, and the post was heeled 2 or 3 inches to one side. Not broken. He worked it back with his hands first, testing the give, then went to the barn for the tools he needed. He spent the better part of the morning on it. The post had to be packed again from the base, and the rail reset and braced. He tamped the soil back in around it in layers, the way it was supposed to be done, and stood the rail back in its bracket and checked the hang of the gate and found it square. He went to the pump and washed his hands. The yard was quiet, just the sound of her at the garden, and the animals doing what animals did. At midday she came to the gate. She was carrying a plate, covered with a cloth. The food she cooked in the small iron pot on the fire, in the pot he had shown her where to find the first week. She set the plate on the top rail, and turned and went back to the garden without a word. He stood at the gate and looked at the plate for a while. She had not done that before. He sat on the post and ate. It was good. He had not thought much about food that morning. After, he took the plate to the pump and washed it, and left it on the back step of the house, and went back to the gate. In the afternoon, she came out to where he was working the south fence. The boards there had healed over in the dry stretch the week before, and some of them needed resetting. She did not ask what he needed. She put her hands on the post he was trying to hold upright and braced it steady. He nailed the rail. They moved to the next one. They went down the section that way, him patching and her holding, without a word between them, until they had done all of it. He looked at the finished section. It was straight. She picked up the tools and carried them to the barn. He walked the fence line to the corner and along the east side and came back through the yard to the side of the house. He was going to check the trough before going in for the evening. He stopped at the corner of the house. The window along the south wall, the one above the kitchen counter, had something on the sill inside the glass. He could see it from the yard. He walked closer. The jar, the small glass jar that had held the seeds. Empty now, the seeds in the ground. She had set it on the sill of the dead wife's window, on the inside, where the evening light came through. He stood in the yard and looked at it. He did not know how long he stood there. The light was going. He went inside. He did not move the jar. He did not say anything about it, because there was no one in the house to say it to, and because there was not a word he trusted for what was in him just then. He lit the lamp. He went to make something for supper. Outside, the wife's seeds were in the ground and growing. That was a different thing from what they had been in the jar on the shelf above the wash basin, and a different thing again from what they had been when he could not bring himself to touch the jar at all. He was still working out what kind of different. A full season had turned. The garden along the south wall of the house was producing. Rows of it, green and heavy, further along than he had expected, because she knew when to water and when not to, and he had been leaving her to it. The fences were all straight. The animals had put on weight through the late summer, and were easy in the mornings and did not give trouble. The barn door sat square. The far field, the one he had been letting sit for 2 seasons before she turned it, had come in and come in well. The farm looked like somewhere a person lived on purpose. He was on the roof in the early afternoon, patching a stretch of sealant along the south-facing slope that had been failing for longer than he wanted to think about. He could hear her below at the garden. After a while she called up. "This one," she said. He looked down. She was pointing to a board along the wall below the eave, pulling away from the frame. Something he had not noticed. "After," he said. She went back to the garden. He finished the roof line and climbed down and looked at the board and found it was worse than it appeared from outside. The wood behind it had taken water at some point and would need replacing. He added it to the list of things for the coming week. He had a list like that now. He had not had a list in a long time. They were not the same 2 people who had ridden north from the market in silence, with nothing settled between them. He did not know what they were instead. The word for it did not exist in any form he trusted. Not partners, because that implied an arrangement, and they had not arranged this. Not family, because that word had a shape he was not ready to put on it, and because it was not quite the right shape in any case. Not 2 people sharing a piece of ground temporarily, because it was not temporary. Something else. Something that had built itself out of small acts, repeated without either of them deciding to build it. He looked at the garden. The seeds from the wife's jar were what had grown along the near edge of the south wall. He could tell by the way they had come in, the same tight rows the wife had used, the same spacing. He did not know that she had known to plant them that way. He had not asked. He knew it now. It was the wife's garden, and it was not the wife's garden. It was both things at once, and he had not made up his mind about that, and she had not asked him to. He thought perhaps he would not make up his mind, and that this would turn out to be all right. He was at the gate in the late afternoon when he looked along the road and saw a rider, far out, too far to make out the figure clearly, moving slowly along the southern stretch, not turning up the track, not the official, not the fourth man. Someone he did not know from this distance, moving as though they had time, which was not how someone with business moved. He watched until the rider passed the far bend and was gone from sight. The world beyond the fence had not finished moving. He had known that since the morning, the fourth man came up the track with his 2 men, and his legal argument, and his careful count of who was standing at the gate. The road went both directions, and people used it, and some of them looked at the farm as they passed, and some of those went away and thought about what they had seen. Then he went back to work. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like. It helps the channel a lot. And drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much. Channel name.